Hello everyone, welcome to another late night stroll through the stranger corners of history. If you found your way here, it's probably because your mind refuses to sleep. So let's give it something quietly absurd to chew on. Let's get lost in time. Before we dive too deeply, a gentle nudge. If you enjoy stories that let you relax and learn at the same time, consider liking this video and subscribing to History at Bedtime. Also, feel free to leave a comment sharing your location and local time. We like to see history travel the globe alongside our viewers. Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. But before you close your eyes tonight, imagine this. There is no clock, no ticking second hand, no blue glow from your phone on the nightstand. The room is lit by a single flame, and outside, the night is infinite, stretching like an ocean that no one has named yet. Once, long before the hum of electricity, people didn't just live in time, they listened to it. The crackle of a fire, the hush of wind through reeds, the way shadows crawled along the walls. These were their clocks. Time wasn't counted, it was felt. So tonight, let's drift back to those early ages when humanity first tried to tame the untamable. The story of how we learned to measure time is one of patience, poetry, and the quiet terror of realizing that every flame eventually dies. It begins in ancient Egypt, somewhere along the Nile, around 3500 BCE. The air is warm and full of dust. Farmers in linen skirts watch the floodwaters rise and fall. Season after season, never quite the same, but never truly strange either. They didn't need calendars to know when to plant. They looked up every year. Just before the Nile flooded, the star Sirius appeared before dawn. To the Egyptians, that star was a celestial clock hand, announcing rebirth. It told them the floods were coming, and with it, life itself. From that star, they built their first calendar, one so accurate it was only off by a few minutes per year. Think about that. 4,000 years ago, with no telescopes, no equations, just eyes and faith. They had nearly mastered solar time, but they didn't stop at the heavens. They looked down to shadow and flame. In the center of an Egyptian temple, a priest in a leopard skin robe watches the sunrise. He places a thin, upright stick in the sand, a gnomon, the ancestor of the sundial. By noon, the shadow is shortest. By sunset, it stretches long and thin like a whisper. Each day, he marks the points. Each season, he notices the change. And so, one of the earliest sundials is born, not from invention, but from observation. Time, they believed, was divine. To measure it was to honor Ra, the sun god himself. So, when they carved their temples, they aligned them with solstices, letting sunlight pierce dark halls once a year, like a god entering his home. But sundials had one flaw. They only worked when the sun was kind enough to show up. At night, when shadows vanished, so did certainty. And that's when they lit the fire clocks. Imagine this scene. A clay bowl, a thin line of oil, and a floating wick. The flame burns slowly, steady, predictable, almost musical. Priests would mark the hours by how far the oil sank. Later, they improved this with water clocks or clepsydrai. These were stone vessels with tiny holes drilled at the bottom. As water dripped out, drop by drop, the falling level marked time's passing, smooth, gentle, and endless. The sound of water in a silent temple, drip, drip, became the rhythm of eternity itself. Egyptians even customized these clocks for different seasons. In summer, when days were long, they widened the hole to let more water flow. In winter, they tightened it as if commanding the hours to slow down. That's how deeply they understood not just time, but the feeling of time. Now, cross deserts and centuries. Let the wind carry you east to Babylon, where time was not worshipped but calculated. The Babylonians turned time into mathematics. They divided the circle of the sky into 360 degrees and created the Bassamini's 60 system, the same system we still use today. When you check your watch and see 60 minutes or 60 seconds, you're counting like a Babylonian. They also invented star charts, mapping the night sky with eerie precision. And when they noticed Jupiter's slow wandering path, they didn't just marvel, they predicted it. Their records are among the oldest known attempts at scientific astronomy. But here's the part most people don't know. Babylonian priests believed each hour was ruled by a different god. When the hour changed, so did fate. That's why some moments were sacred and others cursed. You weren't just late for an appointment, you were late for destiny. By this time, humanity had split into two kinds of timekeepers. The observers, like the Egyptians, who felt time's rhythm through nature, and the calculators, like the Babylonians, who reduced it to numbers and rules. And somewhere between them, a quiet anxiety began to grow, a sense that if time could be measured, it could also be lost. That thought will follow us through this entire story. The Greeks, of course, took time and made it philosophical. For them, time wasn't just hours on a dial. It was existence itself. They had two words for it: chronos, the measurable, linear time, the kind of time we keep with clocks, and kairos, the opportune moment, the right feeling of time. Chronos was the ticking clock. Kairos was that moment when everything just aligned. One ruled life, the other ruled meaning. In Athens, around 400 BCE, you could walk through the agora, the bustling marketplace, and hear both at once the clatter of pottery sellers timing their trades by the sun, and philosophers debating whether time was even real. Socrates mused that time was a moving image of eternity. Aristotle said time was simply the measure of change. And yet, for all their wisdom, they too needed something more practical. Enter the Greek water clock, the klepsydra. Smaller, more precise than the Egyptian version, it became the official timekeeper of the Athenian courts. Trials had limits. When the water ran out, so did your chance to speak. Imagine pleading for your life while watching the last drops fall. Justice, measured by water. The Greeks also built one of the most sophisticated timepieces of the ancient world, the Tower of the Winds in Athens. It was an octagonal marble tower with sundials on the outside and a massive water clock inside. Each face represented a wind god carved with breathtaking detail: Eurus, Boreas, Zephyrus, each blowing softly from his direction. The tower wasn't just a clock. It was a monument to harmony between the heavens, the winds, and human curiosity. But not all Greeks saw time as kind. The myth of Kronos himself tells of a god who devoured his children, time eating everything it creates. Even then, they knew what we still feel today. Time gives life, but it also takes it. Now drift farther west, to Rome, where order ruled everything, even the hours. The Romans borrowed Greek ideas and turned them into infrastructure. Their sundials stood in forums and gardens, carved into marble. Their horologia, public water clocks, became symbols of civic pride. But here's the irony. Romans loved to measure time, yet constantly complained about not having enough of it. Writers like Seneca warned that people squandered their days on trivial things. He wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it." Even in 50 CE, People were already feeling busy. And then there's a deliciously strange Roman tidbit. They divided daylight into 12 hours, but since days change length through the year, their hours did too. A winter hour could be as short as 45 minutes, while a summer hour stretched past 75. So imagine two Romans meeting at the 6th hour, one from winter, one from summer, and realizing they're living in different lengths of time. Historians still debate whether that confused anyone or if they were simply more flexible than we are. Still, for all their engineering brilliance, the Romans feared one thing above all: losing control of the day. Time meant order. Order meant empire. And when sundials cast their shadows wrong, as they often did when placed poorly, the Senate would literally move them. They even changed the calendar itself. By Julius Caesar's decree, the Julian calendar restructured the entire Roman year, adding the leap year we still use. And yet, even Caesar's calendar wasn't perfect. It drifted by 11 minutes each year. That error added up century after century until Pope Gregory fixed it in 1582. So the next time your phone auto-adjusts the clock in spring, you're watching the echo of Caesar's mistake. In the next section, we'll follow the story of time into the medieval world where bells, prayers, and candlelight ruled the rhythm of life, and where, for the first time, people began to wonder if clocks could control the soul. But for now, let your thoughts slow, like water dripping from a clepsydra. And remember, even the ancients slept beneath the same ticking stars. If you listen closely to the night, you might hear it, the faint echo of a bell, drifting over fog and farmland. It's not ringing to wake anyone up. It's calling the soul to keep time. Welcome to the Middle Ages, when time itself was a prayer. Long before wristwatches or alarm clocks, Europe moved to the rhythm of the church bell. Every monastery was a living clock tower, not of gears and cogs, but of people and devotion. At dawn, when the first grey light crept over stone walls, the matins bell tolled. Then lauds, prime, terce, sext, nen, vespers, and compline. 8 times a day, every day, monks stopped whatever they were doing, ploughing, writing, chanting, thinking, and prayed. Each prayer was a unit of time. Each pause, a way to measure eternity. Inside the cloister, silence ruled. A single candle burned beside a sand-filled hourglass, grains falling like a slow heartbeat. When the last grain dropped, the prayer ended. The monks flipped it again, turning time into worship, worship into time. Outside the abbey walls, peasants followed their own clocks, the crow of roosters, the call of merchants, the angle of the sun over the fields. For them, noon was when the shadow of the steeple hit the market cross. Time was local, personal, tied to the land. And yet, a quiet revolution was already beginning, one that would move time from the church to the city square, from the sacred to the mechanical. It began, as many medieval miracles did, with curiosity. Monks were natural tinkerers. They built water clocks to regulate prayers, experimented with candle clocks marked by melted lines, and even counted drips of wax. But in one cold stone workshop, perhaps in England, perhaps in northern Italy, someone did something new. He added a wheel, a weight, and a gear. The world's first mechanical escapement was born. No one knows his name, but that tiny invention would eventually rule the planet, because with it, humanity no longer depended on stars or bells. Time could now be built. Imagine that first mechanical clock in a monastery, a wooden drum wound with rope, weights dropping slowly through the night. Every hour, a hammer struck bronze, a sound like thunder in the stillness. People would stop in their tracks just to listen. The bell didn't just tell the hour, it commanded it. The monastery became a metronome for civilization. When the bell rang for prayer, townsfolk paused their work. When it rang again, bakers removed bread, guards changed shifts, candles were snuffed out. Time was no longer seen. It was heard, but the monks, in their quiet wisdom, noticed something unsettling. The bell that was meant to free their minds for prayer had also chained their days to iron. They had made time obedient, and in doing so, made themselves its servants. Historians still debate whether they understood their irony, but some abbots began to write about the tyranny of the clock, and thus, in the same breath that time was born as a machine, humanity began to fear it. By the 1300s, the bell towers of Europe were no longer just sacred voices, they were civic ones. Every major city wanted its own clock, loud, tall, and visible. From Milan to Paris, London to Prague, engineers competed to build the most intricate machines humanity had ever seen. Each clock was a statement of pride, a declaration that this city could measure the heavens. If you walked through Florence in 1350, you'd see crowds gathering below the Palazzo Tower. When the hour struck, gears clanked, weights groaned, and the great bell rang across the rooftops. Merchants cheered, craftsmen timed their work, and lovers promised to meet at the third bell. For the first time, everyone lived in the same rhythm, but something else quietly changed. The clock wasn't just marking prayers anymore, it was marking profit. Workshops began opening and closing by the bell. Markets timed their exchanges. A blacksmith who worked faster made more coins per hour. The phrase, "time is money," hadn't yet been spoken, but its shadow was already stretching across cobblestones. Inside taverns, travelers complained that towns rang bells too early, too often. Some argued that the clocks were wrong, others that people had grown too right, too rigid. In a world that once moved with the seasons, the sound of iron bells now cut the year into pieces. By 1400, city life was no longer ruled by sunlight or harvest, but by gears, pendulums, and expectations. And yet, amid all that noise, there were still nights when time slowed again, when a scholar stayed awake by candlelight, copying manuscripts about ancient stars, when a mother rocked her child to sleep, counting heartbeats instead of hours, when lovers whispered until dawn, losing all sense of measurement. The clock could divide the day, but it could never conquer the human need to pause. In 1500, Nuremberg unveiled one of Europe's first portable clocks, a gilded marvel small enough to fit in the hand. People gasped. Time could now be carried. A merchant could bring it on a journey. A noble could wear it as jewelry. What began as faith had become fashion. The monastery bell had evolved into the personal watch. The sacred rhythm had become self-contained, ticking quietly in a pocket. And yet, behind every gear and spring, something ancient still lingered. The whisper of fire clocks, dripping water, and the breath of monks waiting for dawn. When we continue, we'll drift into the age of discovery, where sailors steered by stars and pendulums guided ships across oceans, and where losing track of time could mean losing your life. For now, close your eyes. Let the faint toll of a medieval bell fade into silence. Breathe slow, because even when time was first forged in iron, it still kept the rhythm of the human heart. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine the sea. Not the calm blue postcards we know today, but the endless grey expanse of the 1600s, a horizon without end. where wind and stars were your only guides. Now imagine being a sailor then. You could tell your latitude, how far north or south you were, just by looking at the sun's height or the North Star's position. But longitude, that was the real enemy. It was the invisible problem of empire. For every hour your ship's clock lost or gained, you might drift thousands of miles off course. And in an age when nations built fortunes on trade, that meant disaster. Ships smashed on reefs, fleets vanishing into fog, fortunes lost in waves. Kings offered rewards for anyone who could measure time accurately at sea. Britain's Parliament announced the famous Longitude Prize, £20,000, the modern equivalent of millions, for whoever could solve it. And so began one of history's most dramatic races, not for land or gold, but for seconds. In one corner were the astronomers. They believed the key lay in the sky, that by charting the moon's movement, they could calculate time from the heavens. But it was slow, complicated, and useless on a rolling ship. In the other corner stood the clockmakers. They argued that time could be captured in brass and spring. If a clock could tick steadily on a tossing deck, longitude could be measured precisely. Most scholars laughed at that idea. Clocks lose seconds just walking across a room, they said. How could they possibly keep time while crossing the Atlantic? But in a quiet English village, a carpenter named John Harrison decided to try. Harrison wasn't noble. He wasn't even formally educated. But he had a patience the stars might envy. He spent decades crafting clocks out of wood and metal, perfecting balance wheels that resisted heat and humidity. His first sea clock, the H1, was as large as a table, a brass creature of swinging arms and interlocked gears. It worked well on calm seas, but failed in storms. Undeterred, he built another and another H2, H3, each more intricate, more precise. By the time he built H4, it looked like an oversized pocket watch. In 1761, they tested it on a voyage to Jamaica. After 81 days, it was only 5 seconds off. 5 seconds after months at sea. A miracle. The world changed quietly that day. Longitude could now be measured. Empires could map oceans. Sailors could sleep knowing their clocks were keeping them alive. Britain soon dominated the seas, not by might alone, but by timekeeping. The Royal Observatory at Greenwich became the new center of the world. All maps began to measure distance from its meridian, and every ship set its clocks to Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, the heartbeat of empire. But time, as always, had a sense of irony. The same precision that saved sailors also began to regiment ordinary lives. Factories, schools, trains, all synchronized to the clock. The world's pulse became mechanical. What began as a quest to find one's way across the sea had quietly taught humanity to march in rhythm, not to the sun or stars, but to the tick of a machine. Now, let's drift forward to the 18th and 19th centuries, when time was no longer sacred or survival, but commerce. Empires, stock markets, and railroads all demanded precision, and once again, a revolution was ticking quietly in the background. The 1800s, an era of smoke, ambition, and steel. Cities grew faster than anyone could count. Steamships crossed oceans, trains cut through mountains, and factories never slept. But amid this thunder of progress, one problem remained. No one agreed on what time it was. Every town, every railway, every nation set its clocks by its own sun. When noon struck in Paris, it wasn't noon in London, not even close. In New York, trains ran on local time, meaning every station had its own definition of on time. Imagine catching a train that leaves at 2:17 in one city, but arrives at 2:11 in another, and both are right. It was charmingly chaotic until it wasn't. In 1853, two trains collided head-on in New England. Both engineers thought they had the right time. They did, just not the same one. And so, something remarkable happened. Instead of kings or priests declaring time, the railroads did. They divided the world into zones, each one anchored to a shared clock. The modern time zone system was born, and by 1884, the International Meridian Conference in Washington, D.C., officially chose Greenwich as the prime meridian. For the first time in human history, the entire world began to tick together. Of course, not everyone liked it. In France, intellectuals complained that standard time erased individuality, that a farmer in Gascony shouldn't have to obey an English clock. Philosophers called it temporal colonialism, a soft domination of the wristwatch. And yet, the system stuck because it worked. Telegraphs clicked messages across continents, synchronized by GMT. Trains arrived mostly on time. Factories hummed in sequence. The world became predictable, and with predictability came empire. Time had become not just a tool, but a weapon. And still, amid all the precision and profit, people longed for something older, the natural rhythm of dawn and dusk, hunger and rest, seasons and silence. Writers like Thoreau and Ruskin lamented the mechanical age. They said humanity had forgotten to dream at its own pace, and perhaps they were right, because by then, clocks no longer measured time, they measured obedience. But as always, history is cyclical. Just when time seemed fully conquered, new frontiers appeared, places where seconds bent, stretched, and vanished entirely. The next chapters take us into the scientific age, where Einstein shattered the illusion of absolute time, and humanity discovered that even our most precise clocks were only keeping rhythm with relativity itself. For now, though, take a slow breath. Listen for the faint hum beneath the ticking, that timeless heartbeat, connecting temple fires, monastery bells, and ship clocks on stormy seas. Because even now, in the age of satellites and smartphones, the rhythm of time is still older than us and infinitely patient. Imagine, for a moment, the early 1900s, a world still waking up from the Industrial Revolution. Steam hisses from factory vents, telegraph lines hum across continents, and everywhere, clocks are synchronized to the second. Humanity has finally conquered time, or so it thinks. Then, a quiet man with wild hair and a soft German accent walks into history and politely breaks the universe. His name, of course, is Albert Einstein. Einstein didn't look like a revolutionary. He worked in a patent office, timing inventions made by other people. He spent his days stamping documents, his nights staring out the window, wondering about light. He asked a question so simple it bordered on absurd. What if time doesn't tick the same for everyone? At first, no one knew what to do with that. Time was supposed to be universal, a steady drumbeat, but Einstein's equations whispered otherwise. He showed that time flows differently depending on speed and gravity. Move fast enough, and seconds stretch, fall into a gravity well, and clocks slow. Suddenly, absolute time, the very idea that had guided humanity for millennia, calibrated like an old sundial in a storm. Here's the part that still makes physicists smile. Einstein didn't kill Newton's universe. He just tilted it. Space and time, he said, weren't separate. They were one fabric, space-time, a cosmic quilt stitched by light, bent by mass, And on that fabric, every clock, from your wristwatch to a dying star, ticks according to where it sits. Two observers might both be right about what time it is, and still completely disagree. Historians still debate whether Einstein truly grasped the poetic weight of what he'd done, that he'd turned time from something external and divine into something intimate and relative. In a sense, Einstein brought us full circle back to those ancient monks and stargazers who believed time was personal, sacred, and slippery. But unlike them, he proved it. When scientists sent atomic clocks onto airplanes decades later, they came back ticking slower than their twins on the ground. Exactly as Einstein had predicted, time wasn't universal anymore. It was local, like weather or language or belief. And yet, the world didn't stop for philosophy. Trains still had to run. Markets still had to open. Empires still had to keep their minutes aligned. So humanity did what it always does. It took something profound and turned it into infrastructure. The new frontier wasn't the monastery or the sea anymore. It was the atom. If you've ever wondered what the most accurate object in the world is, it's not a diamond or a telescope. It's a clock, and it listens to atoms sing. The story begins in the 1940s, when physicists were searching for a way to measure time that no pendulum or spring could corrupt. The answer lay in the quantum heart of matter itself. Every atom vibrates, not randomly, but rhythmically, like a note in a perfect symphony. Scientists discovered that cesium atoms oscillate 992, 631, 770 times per second. Count that, precisely that, and you have a second that never changes. Thus was born the atomic clock, the quiet monarch of modern time. In 1955, the first cesium clock ticked to life in England's National Physical Laboratory. Its accuracy was staggering. It would lose less than 1 second in 1,000 years. By 1967, the world officially redefined the second, no longer by the sun or stars, but by the steady pulse of cesium atoms. The heavens had been dethroned by quantum mechanics. Of course, once humanity builds perfection, it immediately wants more. Today's best atomic clocks, optical lattice clocks, are so precise they'd lose less than 1 second if they ran for the entire age of the universe. Their pulses are used to calibrate GPS satellites, guiding planes, cars, and your phone with microsecond accuracy. Every map you open, every you hear you see, depends on Einstein's relativity and the heartbeat of cesium atoms orbiting above us. We have, quite literally, built our world upon time, and yet the irony remains. The more precisely we measure it, the less we seem to have of it. Clocks that never drift, calendars that never lie, and still everyone is late, tired, rushed. It's as if, by perfecting time, we've forgotten how to feel it. There's a quiet tragedy in that, because once time was sacred. A prayer whispered at dawn, a flame burning slowly through the night, a shadow tracing eternity across the temple floor. Now it's a push notification. Still, even in this age of atomic rhythm, the human heart keeps its own time, slower, irregular, beautifully flawed. And maybe that's why people still fall asleep to stories of the past, because deep down we long to step outside the seconds, just for a little while. Close your eyes for a moment. Try to count 10 seconds quietly in your head. Go on, I'll wait. Now, if you're relaxed, those 10 seconds probably felt long and heavy, like honey dripping slowly from a spoon. But if your thoughts are racing, they passed in a blink. That, right there, is proof. We don't just live in time, we generate it. Humans have always known that time behaves strangely in the mind. A child's summer afternoon feels eternal. A year in adulthood, barely a breath, and yet both contain the same number of seconds. The Greeks hinted at this when they spoke of chronos and kairos, clock time versus felt time. But it wasn't until the 19th century that scientists began to study it seriously. In Germany, a philosopher named Carl von Weierott conducted experiments with stopwatches and human subjects. He discovered what's now called the law of time perception. When intervals are short, we overestimate them. When they're long, we underestimate them. In other words, the more we pay attention to time, the worse we are at knowing what it is. A few decades later, William James, the father of modern psychology, wrote something almost poetic. Our sense of time, he said, is a succession of feelings, a string of beads on a thread of consciousness. Each bead a moment, each thread uniquely yours. Time, he argued, isn't an external force. It's a construction of memory and expectation. Without memory, there's no past. Without anticipation, there's no future. What we call the present is simply the act of weaving both together. But it goes deeper still. Modern neuroscience shows that our brains actually slow down or speed up time depending on emotion. Fear stretches seconds like elastic. That's why moments of danger feel endless. Joy compresses time, which is why laughter always feels shorter than grief. Even our body temperature, heartbeat, and breathing can warp our internal clock. When you're anxious, your pulse races. Your brain thinks more has happened than actually has. When you're calm, like right now, time dissolves. That's why bedtime stories like this one work. They unspool the tight threads of awareness until your internal gears finally slow down. In medieval monasteries, monks spoke of a similar experience. They called it tempus contemplativum, contemplative time. It was the sense of being so immersed in devotion that hours melted away. Artists, writers, and musicians later described the same thing. The Renaissance painter Fra Angelico said he forgot to eat or sleep while painting his frescoes, as if the hours hid themselves behind the light. Today, psychologists call it flow state, a secular version of the sacred. It seems the more absorbed we are, the less time matters. And perhaps that's why time, for all our attempts to measure it, remains at its heart a feeling. Now, as the candle burns lower in your mind, let's drift into the one place where time truly loses its grip, where hours vanish completely, and the ancient and the modern alike surrender their clocks. Let's dream. Every civilization has wrestled with the mystery of sleep. We spend a third of our lives doing it, and yet, for most of human history, no one knew what it was. To the ancient Egyptians, dreams were dispatches from the gods, messages written in light across the veil of night. Priests in temples of Serapis or Imhotep practiced something called dream incubation. They slept beside sacred statues, hoping for healing visions. Some even kept dream books, listing symbols and their meanings, an ancient form of psychological therapy written in hieroglyphs. In Mesopotamia, kings consulted dream interpreters before battle. A dream of a falling star could mean victory. A dream of a dark river, defeat. In ancient Greece, Aristotle speculated that dreams came from digestion, that the body's warmth created air phantoms in the mind. Meanwhile, the physician Hippocrates insisted dreams could diagnose illness, that a nightmare might reveal imbalance in the humors. For all their differences, they agreed on one thing: dreams had meaning. Sleep was a bridge between worlds. By the Middle Ages, however, the church grew uneasy with the idea. Dreams became suspect, whispers from demons, temptations of pride. Monks wrote that to dream vividly was to risk spiritual corruption, yet still people dreamed, and still they told their dreams in morning light. One medieval physician wrote that those who dream often are visited by excess of imagination. Another simply said, the dream is the echo of the day. How modern that sounds. Fast forward to the 19th century, and a certain Viennese doctor picks up where the monks left off. His name, Sigmund Freud. Freud believed dreams were wish fulfillment, fragments of thought disguised by the subconscious. In them, he said, we are both author and audience. Our hidden desires speak in riddles, and the dreamer's task is translation. It was radical and scandalous and endlessly human, because Freud had stumbled upon an ancient truth. We still crave meaning in the dark, but even Freud couldn't have imagined what modern neuroscience would discover, that while we sleep, our brains don't rest, they rehearse. Neurons replay patterns from the day, consolidating memories, regulating emotion, and clearing metabolic waste. In essence, sleep is housekeeping for the soul. When we dream, the logical centers of the brain quiet down, while the emotional ones light up, which is why dreams make no sense but feel profoundly true. Time inside dreams is elastic, surreal. Minutes can stretch into days. An entire lifetime can unfold between two heartbeats. Astronauts in orbit often describe this sensation. Without sunrise or sunset, they lose track of earthly time. They drift into dream-to-like days, where minutes and memories blur, even in the silence of space. The mind's clock refuses to stop, but it does something curious. It starts keeping time not by seconds or schedules, but by emotion, by the weight of wonder itself. And maybe that's the oldest truth of all, that time is not only measured in movement, but in meaning. That's why an hour of boredom feels eternal, but a night under the stars, gone too soon. As we move forward into the next chapters, we'll explore how modern society has tried and failed to master sleep and time simultaneously, from the ticking heart of industrial cities to the glow of our midnight screens. Humanity now faces a paradox our ancestors never dreamed of. We can measure every second, but we've forgotten how to rest within them. For now, though, let your thoughts slow. Let your body fall into its ancient rhythm, one older than clocks, older than language, because while you sleep, the world still turns, and the oldest timekeeper of all, the human heartbeat, keeps its steady, patient watch. The story of sleep is, in many ways, the story of surrender, the gentle agreement between body and world that says, enough, let's rest. But in the 19th century, something shifted. For thousands of years, humans slept in rhythm with the sky. The sun went down, the stars came out, and life slowed. People drifted to bed shortly after dusk, woke in the middle of the night for an hour or two to pray, read, or whisper, and then slept again until dawn. It was called segmented sleep, or first and second sleep. Every culture had a version of it. The French called it le premier sommeil, the English, the first nap. Even the Romans had a word, concubium, the watch between dreams. This natural rhythm wasn't laziness. It was biological. It matched the darkness, the temperature, the slow beat of night. And then came the machines. By the early 1800s, factories burned through the dark like man-made suns. Time was no longer ruled by light, but by shift whistles and steam engines. The workers' world shrank into 12-hour blocks, each one measured, monitored, monetized. Midnight was no longer sacred. It was just another production cycle. Writers from the time described the eerie glow of mills, windows blazing at 3 a.m., smokestacks pulsing with ember light. In London, observers said the city looked like it had swallowed the stars. For the first time in history, humans tried to live against the night, to make the dark obey. Sleep changed with it. The two-part rhythm collapsed into one long, continuous rest, a single night's sleep squeezed between work days. Doctors noticed people began sleeping less, dreaming less, and waking with a strange new word in their vocabulary, tired. Historians still debate whether industrial sleep was progress or punishment. Yes, it allowed more productivity, but it also eroded one of humanity's oldest luxuries, the right to rest when the body wanted to. Letters from the era tell quiet stories of rebellion, factory women sneaking naps behind looms, miners lying on warm stones between shifts, mothers rocking babies in stolen twilight hours. The night, once infinite, had been divided, like everything else, into profit and loss. And yet, amid the clamour of machinery, a quieter world resisted. Poets began writing about the industrial insomnia. Painters like Whistler and Turner filled canvases with moonlit rivers and ghostly dawns, nostalgic portraits of time before the clock. In 1845, the philosopher Henry David Thoreau retreated to Walden Pond, seeking to live deliberately outside of schedules. He wrote, "Time is but the stream I go a-fishing in." He was right, of course. By the mid-19th century, time had become a current, fast, mechanical, relentless, and few could swim against it. Still, deep beneath all the noise, the human body remembered. It still pulsed, with the same old rhythm, the melatonin whisper, the drowsy waves of circadian light. You can chain a man to a factory clock, but you can't chain the night itself, and that ancient darkness, the one filled with dreams, with silence, with the slow breathing of a sleeping world, waited patiently for us to come back. If you've ever lain awake at midnight, staring at your phone's glow, you've met the ghost of Thomas Edison, because it was the light bulb, not the steam engine, that finally ended the natural night. Edison unveiled his practical incandescent lamp in 1879. He called it a sun in a bottle. The newspapers called it a miracle. The world called it progress. But history, quietly, softly, might call it the Great Disruption. Before electric light, only the wealthy could afford to cheat the dark, burning whale oil or candles that cost hours of labor each night. For everyone else, darkness was an equalizer. It came to all, rich and poor, the same. Then, suddenly, the night was optional. Cities glowed like constellations on Earth. Shopkeepers worked later. Factories expanded shifts, and the line between day and night blurred permanently. The poet Henry Adams, writing in the 1880s, called the electric bulb the god of modern energy. He meant it both as praise and warning, because now, even at 2 a.m., light poured through every window. Humans had inverted creation. We had turned night into day. For the first time, the sky above cities dimmed, not from clouds, but from light pollution. Stars vanished. Darkness, once infinite, became a luxury. Doctors soon began to notice something peculiar. Insomnia was rising. Workers complained of fatigue despite sleeping enough hours. Scientists studying the brain found that artificial light tricked the body's circadian rhythm, suppressing melatonin and delaying natural rest. By the 20th century, sleep had become a problem to be fixed, with caffeine in the morning, sedatives at night, and electric light pulsing through both. And yet, even as we mastered the night, something ancient whispered through the cracks. Writers described a new kind of loneliness, a midnight made too bright to dream in, an ache for silence, a craving for the stars we drowned in electricity. Still, not all was lost. The same light that burned away darkness also illuminated discovery. Under laboratory bulbs, scientists mapped DNA, artists painted through the night, astronomers, aided by electricity, glimpsed galaxies beyond imagination. Light both stole the night and gave us the universe. That's the paradox of progress, isn't it? Every gain comes with a shadow, and sometimes the brighter the flame, the longer the shadow it casts. Now, as your eyes grow heavy and the modern night hums faintly beyond your window, remember, for most of human history, darkness was not something to fear. It was the canvas upon which time painted its most mysterious hours. For thousands of years, dreams belonged to poets, priests, and mystics. But by the early 20th century, they were taken in by new guardians, the scientists. In 1929, a German psychiatrist named Hans Berger placed tiny electrodes on his son's scalp. He wasn't looking for dreams, he was looking for electricity. What he found instead was astonishing. The human brain, even in stillness, hummed like a living galaxy. The machine traced waves across paper, slow undulations when calm, rapid storms when awake. It was the first electroencephalogram, or EEG, the birth of brainwave science. For the first time, humanity could watch itself sleeping. As the decades passed, the mysteries deepened. In the 1950s, researchers in Chicago made a discovery so strange it sounded like poetry. Every 90 minutes, sleeping brains flickered with rapid eye movements, tiny twitches beneath closed lids, like whispers from another world. They called it REM sleep, and they noticed something curious. Whenever REM appeared, people reported vivid, emotional dreams upon waking. The ancients might have said the soul was traveling. Scientists simply said, the mind is remembering. Dreaming wasn't divine anymore. It was neurological. Yet, somehow, that made it even more miraculous. Sleep, it turned out, was not a passive escape, but a complex symphony, an orchestration of light and deep stages, of brainwaves rising and falling like tides. In stage N1, the world fades. In stage N2, your muscles soften, your breathing steadies. In stage N3, deep, slow wave sleep repairs the body. And then MAM, the night's secret theater, where memory, imagination, and emotion merge in ways waking thought never could. Each cycle lasts about 90 minutes, like the turning of an invisible hourglass inside the brain. The ancients might have prayed between their first and second sleep. Now we understand they were moving between stages of the same profound rhythm. By the 1960s, sleep laboratories were everywhere, sterile temples of science where volunteers denseed under wires and blinking machines. They revealed something quietly humbling. No matter how advanced a civilization becomes, sleep still holds dominion over us. You can't negotiate with it. You can't command it. You can only surrender. And in that surrender lies a truth the ancient dream interpreters would have recognized instantly, that the night, even under fluorescent light, still belongs to mystery. Some of the most revealing discoveries came from people deprived of time itself. In 1962, a French cave explorer named Michel Siffre descended into a vast underground cavern. No clocks, no sunlight, no contact with the surface. He wanted to know what would happen if time disappeared. He stayed for 63 days. At first, he followed a regular sleep pattern, but slowly, something strange happened. His days stretched longer, 26 hours. His body created its own rhythm, guided by no sun, no schedule, only internal time. When he finally emerged, blinking into daylight, he was shocked to learn how far his inner clock had drifted. He thought he'd been underground for a month. It had been twice that. Siffre proved what philosophers had guessed for centuries, that time lives not in the world, but within us. By the late 20th century, scientists had mapped nearly every stage of sleep, but not its meaning. For all the data, the dream remained untamed. Why do we dream? Why do we forget? And why? Despite centuries of progress, do we still lie awake some nights, watching the slow, relentless march of the clock? Maybe because, like the Egyptians, the Greeks, the monks, and the sailors, we're still trying to find harmony with something that doesn't belong to us. Sleep, it turns out, was never lost. We simply forgot how to listen to it. If the Industrial Revolution mechanized the day, the 20th century accelerated it. Trains had synchronized nations. Now, airplanes began synchronizing continents. Messages that once took months to cross the sea could now be sent in seconds by radio and later in milliseconds by computer. Time, for the first time, began to feel shorter than life itself. Writers of the era noticed it immediately. The French poet Paul Valéry said, "The future is no longer what it used to be." Philosophers like Henri Bergson warned that mechanized time was replacing lived time, what he called la dire, the felt flow of experience that can't be divided into minutes. But the world was already racing ahead. Factories worked 24 hours a day. Wars were fought on timetables so strict that soldiers were synchronized like gears in a machine. By the 1940s, global empires ran not on gold or oil, but on time coordination, timetables, signals, and deadlines. It was said that whoever controlled the clock controlled the world. And then the ultimate expression of speed arrived. The airplane. The Wright brothers lifted off in 1903, and within decades, people were crossing oceans in hours. For the first time, you could have breakfast in Paris and dinner in New York. The earth itself seemed to shrink beneath the ticking of wristwatches. But speed came with its own distortions. Travelers began reporting strange sensations: fatigue, confusion, insomnia. Scientists gave it a name: jet lag. It wasn't just exhaustion, it was temporal dislocation. The body's ancient clock, evolved under slow-moving suns, had been yanked through time zones faster than it could comprehend. We'd bent space, but time was fighting back. Meanwhile, in cities, another kind of acceleration took hold: the rush of modern life. The invention of the digital clock in the 1970s made seconds impossible to ignore. No longer could time drift unseen. It flashed insistently from every wall, every wrist, every device. The numbers didn't just mark time, they demanded it. Psychologists began documenting what they called time anxiety, the feeling that we're always behind, even when we're not. By the late 20th century, entire cultures defined themselves by speed. Fast food, fast travel, fast internet. Even rest had to be optimized. And so, a strange paradox emerged. For the first time in history, we had more time-saving technology than ever, and yet no time to spare. Still, amid the blur of modernity, some voices pushed back. Writers like Alan Watts reminded us that life is not a race to the finish line. Philosopher E.F. Schumacher argued for Buddhist economics, a system where efficiency meant harmony, not haste. Even artists rebelled. The filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky once said, "Cinema should sculpt time, not destroy it." He meant that beauty requires slowness, that there is wisdom in stillness, and a kind of truth that only appears when we stop rushing long enough to notice it. And maybe that's what all of history's clocks, calendars, and rituals have been trying to tell us. That time isn't meant to be conquered, it's meant to be inhabited. To measure it is human, but to feel it, to sit quietly inside it, is divine. In the next part of our story, we'll step into the digital age where time has become both infinite and fragmented, scattered across screens, Norton Descend, and sleepless nights. We'll see how technology, for all its miracles, has returned us to the same old question: how do we find rest when even the stars have been replaced by pixels? But for now, take a breath, let the pace of the world slow to match your own, and remember, the clock may measure time, but only you can decide how to live it. Once, people gathered around bells and sundials. Then, they gathered around wristwatches. Now, they gather around screens. If you think about it, every age has had its master clock. For the Babylonians, it was the stars. For the medieval monks, it was the bell tower. For the Victorians, it was the train schedule. And for us, it's the glowing rectangle in our hands. The digital age didn't just measure time, it dissolved it. It began innocently enough. In the 1970s, red LED watches appeared, tiny marvels that blinked numbers instead of ticking hands. People gasped. No gears, no ticking, no waiting. Time, now, was instant. By the 1980s, computers began tracking microseconds. By the 1990s, the internet connected clocks across the world in perfect synchronization. The Network Time Protocol, NTP, kept every computer heartbeat aligned with atomic precision. No sunrise or prayer bell had ever been this accurate, and yet, strangely, we started to feel late. With every technological miracle came a new form of urgency. Emails replaced letters, then texts replaced emails, and social media replaced silence itself. Now, the clock doesn't live on the wall, it lives in your pocket. It buzzes, it demands, it judges, it tells you when to wake up, when to post, when to reply, when to rest, though we rarely listen. Even sleep, once a sacred escape from the ticking world, is now tracked and quantified. Smart watches count REM cycles. Apps score your slumber. We've built machines that measure dreams, but not the meaning of them. Historians once wrote that the invention of the clock made humans more disciplined. Now, perhaps it has made us more divided, fragmented between the moment we live and the one we're already documenting. The sociologist Hartmut Rosa called this social acceleration, a world moving so fast, even leisure feels like labor. And yet, the irony is sharp. The faster we move, the more we crave stillness, the more connected we become, the more we long for silence. Even as we measure time to the billionth of a second, most of us can't remember the last time we felt it. But here's the quiet truth. For all the chaos, time hasn't changed. Only our relationship to it has. The digital clock, the smartphone, the server farm, they're just the newest temples built around an ancient god. and like all gods before it, this one demands worship. Likes, views, clicks, each one a little prayer to relevance, each one another grain of sand slipping through the glass. But beyond the glow of all our devices, the stars still rise and fall, the moon still governs the tides, and the same ancient rhythm beats on, indifferent to notifications, unchanged by progress. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it under the hum of your router, the slow, patient breath of eternity. The story of time, it seems, has always been a pendulum, swinging between motion and rest, noise and silence, day and night. And after centuries of acceleration, we are once again drifting back towards stillness. You can see it everywhere. People lighting candles instead of screens, digital detox retreats in the mountains, books that teach slowness like it's a lost art, apps that help you forget your apps. It's almost funny. We've built the fastest civilization in history, and now we pay to slow down. But perhaps this was inevitable. Every era that mastered time eventually sought to escape it. In the monasteries, monks fled the chaos of cities for silence. In the industrial age, poets fled the clock for the woods. And now we flee the algorithm for the ancient rhythm, the quiet, candlelit pace of being human again. Sleep science calls it circadian alignment. Philosophers call it presence. But really, it's just remembering how to exist without counting it. When astronauts orbit the Earth, they see 16 sunrises and sunsets every 24 hours. And yet, they report something beautiful, a sense that time no longer moves linearly, that every moment, every glance at the Earth's curve feels eternal. They describe it as overview effect, the realization that the boundaries of time and place are illusions, that the human story, with all its ticking clocks and glowing screens, is just a heartbeat in something much greater. We don't have to leave the planet to feel that. You can sense it, even now, in the hush between breaths, in the glow of twilight, in the stillness that hums behind the world's noise. Our ancestors watched fire shadows dance across cave walls. We watch pixels move across glass, different mediums, same longing. To understand time not as a prison, but as a poem. Historians say the oldest clock ever found, a water clock from ancient Egypt, measured the hours by how slowly water escaped through a hole. Maybe that's the lesson, that no matter how advanced we become, we're all still just drops falling quietly through the vessel of our lives. Each second dissolving, each memory shaping the rhythm of the next. And perhaps that's enough. In the next and final chapters, we'll explore what the future of time might look like, how quantum physics, artificial intelligence, and interstellar travel are already reshaping what it means to be on time at all. But before we look forward, let's pause right here, because stillness is not the absence of time. It's the moment we finally meet it. So breathe deeply. The story isn't ending. It's just moving more slowly now, like water, like stars, like sleep. There was a moment, not too long ago, when humanity thought it had mastered time. Atomic clocks beat with precision so perfect they would drift less than a second over the age of the universe. Computers ran faster than thought, and satellites synchronized the entire planet. For a while, we believed we'd reached the end of the story, that time was solved. But, as always, the universe had other ideas. In the 21st century, physicists began to discover cracks in our understanding, not in the clocks, but in reality itself. At the smallest scale, the quantum realm, time behaves like a mischievous trickster. Particles appear and vanish. Causes follow effects instead of preceding them. And in certain experiments, events seem to unfold without a clear order at all. It's as if the universe occasionally forgets which way the seconds are supposed to go. Einstein once said that time was a stubborn illusion. Quantum physics seems to be quietly agreeing. Some researchers now suggest that time might not be fundamental at all, that it's something the universe invents, a byproduct of relationships between particles, an emergent property, not a cosmic law. If that's true, then everything we've built, from sundials to supercomputers, is not a measurement of time itself, but of how we perceive change. We've been measuring shadows on the wall, not the flame that casts them. Still, science pushes forward toward clocks that no longer rely on atoms, but on quantum entanglement. These quantum clocks can measure time with unimaginable accuracy, tracking fluctuations in gravity so subtle they can detect the difference between your head and your feet. Think about that. Time flows infinitesimally slower at your feet than at your face, not metaphorically, literally. In such a precise universe, there's no longer one now. Each part of you lives in a slightly different moment. The ancient philosophers would have loved that. Heraclitus said, "You cannot step into the same river twice." He didn't know that, on a quantum level, you can't even exist in the same second twice. But while physicists chase eternity in equations, engineers have begun creating something else entirely: artificial time. Every digital system, every computer, every network, every AI runs on its own clock. Billions of machines ticking in harmony, each one creating, consuming, and recalculating time faster than any human could comprehend. Artificial intelligence doesn't experience seconds, it processes them. Some philosophers believe that as AI evolves, it may form its own perception of time, not measured by sunrise or heartbeat, but by data flow, by processing cycles, by electric thought. To an AI, our sense of time might look primitive, like sundials in the rain. And so, the next revolution may not be about conquering time, but about coexisting with multiple kinds of it: human time, machine time, and cosmic time. The future, it seems, won't be faster, it will be layered. Which brings us to an unsettling but beautiful question. If time can be bent, divided, and rewritten, what happens to the story of us? If we build machines that remember everything, what becomes of forgetting? If we record every moment, what becomes of eternity? Perhaps the answer lies not in building better clocks, but in learning to live beyond them. Every civilization in history has dreamed of escaping time. For the Egyptians, it was the afterlife. For the Greeks, the gods. For modern science, it's the algorithm. But maybe, just maybe, we've already begun. In space, astronauts aboard the International Space Station orbit Earth every 90 minutes. They witness 16 sunrises and sunsets each day. Yet, when they describe the experience, they speak not of speed, but of stillness. They say that floating above the Earth feels like living outside time itself. Their hearts beat slower, their thoughts stretch longer. They see the world as one continuous motion. No borders, no ticking, no rush. This is what physicists call time dilation, but poets might call it grace. The deeper humanity ventures into space, the stranger time becomes. A day on Mars is 24 hours and 37 minutes long. On Mercury, one day equals 176 Earth days. Near a black hole, a few hours could equal centuries elsewhere. Someday, explorers will live in colonies across planets and moons, each bound to their own unique clocks, their own rhythm of dawn and dusk. Perhaps then, for the first time since Babylon, we'll rediscover time as it truly is. Local, relative, personal. There will be no universal schedule, no single now, just millions of overlapping eternities, like ripples on a cosmic pond. Back on Earth, philosophers are already asking what comes next. Will immortality, digital or biological, destroy our sense of meaning? After all, what is preciousness, if not the awareness that moments end? In trying to outlive time, we may risk losing what makes time worth living in. Perhaps that's the final paradox of progress, that in our pursuit of eternal life, we forget how to live for a single fleeting minute. And yet, amid all the speculation, something tender persists. Every morning, people still wake with the sunrise. Every evening, they still fall asleep beneath the stars. Children still measure time in birthdays and school years. Lovers in stolen nights. The elderly in long golden afternoons. No matter how far we travel, to space, to simulation, to whatever comes next, the heartbeat remains our first and last clock. The ancient philosophers were right about one thing. Time doesn't move. We do. We move through its vast ocean, creating meaning in every stroke. And someday, when the machines hum quietly without us, the stars will still trace their eternal arcs across the sky, measuring a time that no one needs to keep. In our final chapters, we'll return to where it all began, to the fires templates and sundials that first taught humanity to look upward and listen. We'll reflect on what time has given, what it's taken, and what remains when the ticking stops. But before we close that circle, pause with me for a breath. You've traveled through millennia tonight, from shadows on stone to atoms of light, and somehow you've arrived exactly on time. It's strange to think about, isn't it? That one day, the very idea of keeping time might fade away. Imagine a world where clocks no longer dictate your day, where there's no alarm shrieking you into wakefulness, no calendar flashing red deadlines, no invisible pressure to keep up. It sounds almost impossible, and yet, in some quiet corners of the world, it's already happening. In tiny research stations in Antarctica, where 6 months of sunlight are followed by 6 months of darkness. Time loses its grip. People sleep when they're tired, eat when they're hungry, and find their rhythms bending to something more ancient, the body's quiet intuition. Similarly, in isolated communities of the Arctic, the midnight sun blurs the line between day and night. There, people have learned to live in cycles, not schedules. Time becomes less a command and more a companion. Historians say the first clocks were created to bring order, but maybe at the end of the story, we'll find peace in letting go of that order. And yet, silence can be unsettling, because without clocks, who are we? Our entire civilization, our productivity, our progress, even our self-worth, is built on the measurement of minutes. Every appointment, every deadline, every success story begins with a timestamp. Without that, would we still know how to live? Philosophers call this the paradox of time awareness. We built time to control our lives, and in doing so, it began to control us. Perhaps the end of timekeeping won't come from technology breaking down, but from us remembering what it's like to exist without measuring it. You can already feel it in modern movements, the growing longing for slow living, for still mornings, for the soft quiet of nothing scheduled, the same longing that once sent monks into the wilderness and sailors across uncharted seas, now draws people back to their own inner worlds. Maybe someday the clock on your wall will stop ticking, and instead of rushing to replace it, you'll simply let it rest. Maybe you'll realize that nothing has truly stopped. The world keeps turning, the light keeps shifting, the heart keeps beating. Time never needed to be kept. It only needed to be noticed. The philosopher Alan Lightman once wrote, "Perhaps the universe is not made of atoms, but of moments." And maybe he's right, because what we remember, what we love, what we ache for, those are not seconds or minutes. They're moments suspended in the amber of memory. When the clocks fall silent, perhaps that's what remains, the quiet pulse of experience itself. So here we are, at the edge of the story, and maybe at the edge of time itself. We began in the ancient night, with stone temples and dripping water clocks. We wandered through candlelit monasteries and ticking towers. We built machines that split seconds, and dreams that outlasted centuries. And now we return, not backward, but inward, to the one clock that has always mattered, the steady rhythm within you. Somewhere out there, beyond the noise of the world, time still hums softly, like the sea against the shore. You can almost hear it if you listen, a whisper between the seconds, a pause between breaths. That sound, that soft, almost invisible pulse, is the heartbeat of everything. As you rest tonight, remember how far you've traveled, from the ancient astronomers mapping the heavens, to the medieval monks keeping vigil by candlelight, to the scientists who now measure time by atoms and photons. All of them, across millennia, were chasing the same thing you are now, the feeling of being present in a fleeting universe. The truth is, we've never conquered time. We've only danced with it. And maybe that's enough. Historians still debate when civilization began. Some say it started with writing, others with agriculture, but maybe, just maybe, it began the first time someone looked up at the stars and realized they were watching tomorrow. That moment of wonder, that spark of awareness, is still alive in you. As you drift towards sleep, imagine those stars above ancient Babylon, above Rome, above Kyoto, above every dreaming city that's ever existed, all of them still shining, still marking time, still patient. The same constellations that guided farmers, kings, and sailors now guide your breathing. You are part of that rhythm, that endless cosmic pulse. So let the story fade now. Let the noise of the day fall away. You've walked through the ages tonight. You've crossed oceans of memory and centuries of light. And now, the only thing left to do is close your eyes. The clocks can rest. The world can wait. Time will take care of itself. Sleep well, traveler of centuries. You've reached the end of the story. But time is only just beginning again. Good night, and remember, eternity is never elsewhere. It's always right here, in this quiet, borrowed moment.